Right, so here we are, we're back in our game, and what we're going to look at very briefly here is the concept of a function, which is a sub-program. So we always think of code as like one big program, but actually there's lots of different components with it. And while all these different questions that trigger on the sort of the kind event work like functions, they're not quite functions in terms of the way MakeCode Arcade understands them. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to convert this to a function, and we're going to call it. So first thing we do is we're going to go to Advanced. We scroll down and we've got the functions menu here. And click on that, and you can see it's empty. Make a function, and I'm going to call it question1. Now we need to make sure here any names aren't duplicated, so I couldn't call it Q1 or so on, or any other name that I've used anywhere else in my program. So it's got to be unique. So we call it question1. Click done. The only obvious change on my workspace is I've now got this function question1 here. If I go back to the functions menu, you can see now I've got a box, I've got a return for if we're going to pull values out of them, but then I've also got call question1. So the first thing I need to do is move this code and put it into my function. And really simply, if I click on the block, the move at the top, I can move that entire block of code and drop that in there. And if it's covering things up, you've got an arrow now where you can just click and collapse it rather than having to right click on a block and select collapse it, which is what I've done with these here. So you can see there's no actual arrow. You've got to right click and select collapse block. Now it's there, but now if I just reactivate my first sprite, if we run the game though, we have a slight issue of that actually it doesn't trigger anything. So now we need to tell it that when the sprites overlap to run this function which contains all of our code for our first question. So I'll go back to the functions menu, call question1, drag, and drop. That now goes in there. So now if I just move this and open it up so we can see it sort of on the workspace, when I interact with the first sprite here now, so we get the event, it's going to overlap, and then it's going to run this. And it's going to do all of this code then, and then it comes back out, and I'll move, and all of the things that happened before the changing of the kinds will carry on. To make a new function, it's really quite simple. I could either, if I'd only made this as my first question, I could right click, I could duplicate it, then change the content, and it will then call it question2, or I could go back to functions, I can click make function, and then I can just create another one. And what that's going to allow me to do is to just keep the workspace really nice and organized. So I can collapse the blocks, I can arrange my functions, and have the triggers for them above it, which means finding what I need is going to be much, much easier.